When you travel deep into the wilderness, those turkey and cheddar Lunchables you stuffed into your backpack aren't going to help you. In fact, they'll go to waste quickly as you become a human Lunchable for some ferocious and ravenous creature that stalks those woods. Today, I finally have some scary and allegedly true backpacking stories that will have you rethinking that hiking trip, and probably your life too. Enjoy the stories, and be sure to share your own with us at darkstories.org for a chance to have them narrated. Now, let's begin. Round and Round the Past by Anonymous. The first day of spring on the Montana mountains is still winter more often than not, but I was determined to mark it with spring's first outing into the woods. I threw together some snacks, a thermos of hot tea, a spare flannel shirt in case the weather turned bad, and I slung my backpack over my shoulder. I would be backpacking to the Canyon Campground, a place with only an outhouse bathroom at the base, a couple of fire pits, and no other development beyond deer trails and an old logging road, which was rumored to lead to a meeting place of modern-day druids. As expected, winter was still hanging on as the elevation increased, and snow lay under every tree and bush, unmarked by even animal tracks. They had the sense to stay asleep or in hiding and wait for better weather, unlike me. The snow of the campground itself showed marks from tire tracks of that same day, maybe just an hour old or less. Crossing the first long field heading toward the trees on the mountainside, the snowmobile tracks told me what the vehicles had been there for, and it looked to be a good time had by all. Even though it was silent now, I could imagine the noisy engines and people in snowsuits packing down the trails with their machines, having a blast. I hoped they hadn't disturbed the wildlife as some people like to do, but I was happy to see that the only deer tracks were punched through the snowmobile tread marks, not the other way around, so the deer had come and crossed the trail after they were gone. Deer's eyes have a funny way of making a person feel watched, and I was starting to feel that effect as I tried to walk quietly through the semi-packed trails and make my way to the huge ponderosa pine that some of us called the Father Tree. This tree stands above all the others and is so wide at the base, 2 people can stand behind it and never be seen from the front. The tree was the site of many nature lovers' offerings. I had seen hanging crystals, little clay animals, coins, home-baked breads, and jewelry. These things had the feel of offerings, not sacrifices. Happy presents given in wonder or thanks for the gift of spending time in the presence of this giant. By a certain point in my hike, I knew I should be getting close to the Father Tree soon. I looked forward to the stop where I could sit on some of the branches, drink some tea, and be with the old pine. Moments passed, but that watched feeling did not lessen, nor did I reach the tree like I expected. I circled around to try to find the trail again. I'd been here 50 times before, at least, in every season and all kinds of weather, day or night. I should have been there already, and I definitely should not have gotten lost. I passed an old falling wooden rail fence with some old words carved into it. I paid no attention to it on my way to find the tree. And yet again, I found myself somehow not at the tree, passing the fence again. I glanced at it and saw there were some kinds of names and dates carved in the silvery gray wood, but I pressed on with my single-minded goal. Then a third time, the tops of all the trees looked the same without a patriarch standing above them. I was becoming irritated with myself. How could I be so stupid that I could not find a place where I'd been so many times before? And again the fence, my tracks, and I noticed this time around the writing included some kind of military rank as part of the names. That detail was a bit interesting, but it still wasn't enough to deter me from finding the tree. The day was getting on. The sunlight began to turn orange gold, slanting under the clouds. I knew there wasn't much time left to get to this completely simple and nearby location I wanted to visit, not to mention it gets dangerous when the temperature falls. I went up the slope again, focused on the dirt road beneath the snow, which I could feel. The steady rise in the ground, the number of steps I knew so well that should take me to my destination. The ground began to slope downwards again, and I knew I had once more somehow bypassed the simple turn to the right that would have taken me 30 feet up to the tree. The deer were beginning to come out, watching from between the trees now. It was getting to be their time to enjoy the twilight privacy of the place, which should be abandoned. But there I was, the watched feeling getting even more intense, and I knew it was time to give up. With a sigh, I started to go back toward the way out, and somehow found myself once again at the falling down rail fence. I stopped, and I really looked at it this time. I got close to it this time to read the letters carved in pocket knife block text. A story was told in the letters, and the lack of them. Private J. Collins and Mary P. August, 1941. That was written inside of a heart. Then below that, the lone name of the one who waited. Mary P. August, 1942. Then Mary, December 25th, 1942. There were bird pecks from flickers going after bugs in the old wood, and there were other faintly scratched names of passers-by, and one more deep, gouged, untidy carving after that. Lieutenant J. Collins, 1944. There was a weathered gash in the wood beside it. I felt it all then, how Mary had come back to track time while her lover went overseas to war. How time passed, and she either gave up hope of seeing him again, or had passed away. I could smell the musty wool of the soldier's coat then. I felt the chill setting into his hands as his heart broke, and he carved that last date into the wood. There was a rusted and crushed old canteen pressed into the cold, dead tan grass and ice, half buried by the fence post. My eyes stung and grew watery for him, and I pressed my head against those letters. I'm sorry, Jay. I hope you found happiness again. But something told me that he hadn't. The acknowledgement and the touch of a warm human hand on the carved letters appeared to have released some hold over my mind, because when I looked up, the sunset was lighting up the top of the father tree, standing above all the others on the mountainside, like some golden green flaming beacon. It was too late to hike up there again and go to it, but I stayed at the old fence a while longer and had a warm thermos of tea and talked to the unseen presence of Lieutenant Collins, wishing him a warm spring, promising I'd come back other times to remember him on visits to the father tree. Hunted. From Bilbo's 1776. I enjoy hiking, and in 2015 I set my sights on getting to know more of the Pryor mountain range, the western side to be more specific. It was July, and I had 2 full weeks of paid vacation coming, so I took it. I packed my things, grabbed my .38 Special. I believed I had everything I'd needed. I had a friend drop me off close to the mountains, and off I went, backpacking my way through. The first day went well. I got into the alpine areas, where it was cooler and had good sources of water, which was necessary for my MREs. I still cleaned the water by boiling and using chlorine tablets to be safe. 4 days in, nothing happened other than me enjoying the beauty of the place. Close to the 5th evening, I observed at one point that there were no sounds coming from the forest, like usual. until a squirrel chattered and everything started back up again. That was weird, but I brushed it off as them seeing me and going silent for a moment. That night, I made my fire, after running some rope with bells on it, hanging it around my camp just far enough off the ground that they would jingle if the rope was bumped. I stoked the fire with some dry logs and one very large chunk of damp log, in hopes of preserving enough embers to restart the fire in the morning. Checking over everything one more time, I settled into my one-man army tent for what would be a night from hell. What must have been 4 or 5 hours later, I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I sat still, listening, for some reason feeling an edge in the air. Then, I heard a single jingle-jangle sound from off to the left. Then it went quiet. There was no breathing, no footsteps, no wind, no crickets. 5 or 10 minutes of silence went by before there was another jingle-jangle. It was coming from the right. Again, it went quiet. I couldn't tell if there was actually anything out there. Then, with my ears strained to their limits, I heard the faint crunch of pine needles. I reached up to the corner of my tent, thankful I hadn't brought my nylon sleeping bag, which would have made way too much noise, more than the bells had. I grabbed the pistol grip and slowly brought my other hand over to grab the holster. Then I readied it. I had the hammer pulled back as silently as possible. I put my hand back at my side. 3 more times the bells rang. 3 more times I gripped that pistol harder, straining my ears. Each time the ringing came from a different point in the circle of rope, as if whatever it was really wanted to get in, but did not like the sound the bells were making, and perhaps could not step over them. Meanwhile, I'm weighing the possibilities of what it could be. There was almost no other sound except for testing the perimeter. What could be that quiet, and why was the forest itself so silent? Hours must have passed as the sun just barely began to light up the area outside my tent. By this time, I hadn't heard anything for at least 2 hours, though I didn't have a way to tell time, so it was anyone's guess. I finally got up the nerve and abruptly extracted myself from the small tent, awkwardly, as I had to throw off a sleeping bag and unzip 2 zippers before getting out. Revolver in hand, eyes wide, I looked everywhere around me. Once I knew nothing was just standing out there waiting for me, I scoured the ground close to the rope. Then, using the small light I had on my hat, I found it. Only one. The faintest of paw prints and only a partial one. It was about the size of my fist and had what looked to be a padded foot with 3 toes to it. I didn't see any evidence of claws, though. My first thought was mountain lion. Instantly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a "you're being watched" vibe came through me. I quickly looked up, saw a flash of eyes from the faint light from my hat. That's when I was attacked. In that moment, I somehow had pointed the gun up, shot, and my other arm was coming up to protect my throat, which somehow was a piece of information that snuck through the chaos that I had learned from a trapper friend of mine. Cats go for the throat. In an instant, I was slammed to the ground, pressure suddenly on my left forearm, claws digging through my thick canvas jacket. Then, with a lurch and yet harder bite, I felt teeth in my arm, and I fired my gun again. To no avail, except to either simply piss it off more, or give a flesh wound to the beast, because it clamped down even harder. More sharp pain shot through me, and then the grip of my pistol was no longer in my right hand. I began to flail about, kicking, punching, nothing but more ripping of my arm and upper legs for a response. I do not know how long we struggled, me never thinking of the knife in my belt, only the pain and the thought that I was being torn apart. For a moment, the entire atmosphere seemed to change. I felt the release of its jaws around my arm. The claws left my flesh in a flash of pain, and then came the sudden and sort of cruel sound of pain coming from the mountain lion. It was a sound I'll never forget, and in the next moment, there was a movement above me and the feeling of being grasped by the hair on my chest through what was left of my clothes. Air whipped past my ears, and then there was nothing but darkness. I woke up to a throbbing in my head like no hangover could ever produce. I had an ache all over my body. Looking up, I found a cloudy gray sky, wind blowing something fierce. My body would not cooperate with me, not for a while. When it finally did, I found a battleground all around me. I looked around beside the tree I woke up next to. I found a dead mountain lion. I fell back in surprise. An hour or so later, once I got moving, I knew I couldn't stop, or I'd never get out of the freaking forest. Somehow I found the energy to push forward. I found my revolver. I cleared the barrel and used every Neosporin packet in my medkit on my arm wound. I bandaged the worst of my leg wounds. I ate a dry MRE and drank some water. I didn't take anything when I left there, except for the medkit, some food, and some bullets. I never went back to get the rest. I spent a night in a ranger cabin that had nothing but the springs out of an old mattress to sleep on, then moved on to try and get phone service. Once I got home, I had time to think about everything that had happened. What could throw me, a 200-pound man, like a pillow, and kill a 130-pound mountain lion so easily? This question is what keeps me out of the woods, away from what I once loved, to this day. There was no report about this, and I went to a pro-med clinic to get stitched up. Round here, when you say you don't want to talk about it, people don't ask more. Just be careful if you think you still need to go camping, because there are multiple forces at work, some natural, and others far from it. Backpacking in the Woods, from Stalked and Hunted. I'll be 25 on the 26th of September. This is important because it was my 15th birthday when I had the worst backpacking experience of my life, so it'll be the 10-year anniversary this Thursday. I've always been a very observant person. My great-grandmother always said I was an old soul who took in everything. But the one time I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings, it almost got me killed. I was backpacking with my best friend, Lacey, and her family in the Appalachian Woods, just off of the Blue Ridge Parkway in Boone, North Carolina. She and I had been best friends since we were toddlers, and her parents always made a point of taking me out for my birthday for a getaway. We were just over an hour from our hometown, so not too far, but also not too close. It was a chilly fall day, and the air tasted of fallen leaves and smelled of apples. There was a light fog in the air, but not enough to hinder your vision. We set up our camp around 7 in the morning and gathered our supplies for a day-long hike through the thick forest around us. There was a slight dampness in the air, and I remember feeling a slight wind that was beating at my light jacket. Once our hiking gear was equipped, Lacey and I began our trek, pushing thick undergrowth to the side and maneuvering to find the path located near our tent. I must mention here we didn't see anyone else at the other campsite, nor the parking lot when we parked our car. It was entirely deserted, which tickled my adrenaline and gave me a bit of a rush. Once we found the path, which was covered in undergrowth, we began climbing the mountain to hopefully get some good views in before needing to return to camp. I had my old camera with me that I took everywhere, being an aspiring photographer. The path was hard to follow at times, but Lacey and I did our best. About halfway to the top, we stopped for lunch. It was then that I thought I heard something in the bushes behind us, but Lacey convinced me it was just nerves, because this was our first hike without parents. We enjoyed some protein bars and water from our canteens when... thunk. "What was that?" I asked Lacey. "Probably a squirrel," she answered, looking around nervously. "Yeah, you're probably right," I said. We hurried up and finished our lunch, then removed our jackets as the midday sun warmed the air around us. "All right, Mila, let's get going if you want to see the peak before time to head back," Lacey said. We continued hiking up the steep terrain, and I nervously shook the feeling that we were being watched. I've since learned not to shake that instinct. We made it to the summit about 3 hours after lunch and looked around in awe. We had camped there many times over the past few years, but there was something about experiencing it with just your best friend by your side that made it that much more breathtaking. "It's beautiful," Lacey said, breaking the silence. "It really is. I don't remember being able to see that far into the distance," I replied. I took several photos and bagged my camera. We sat down and had a snack while taking in everything with each of our senses. The smell of the autumn air, the feel of the cool damp air on our skin, the sounds of the woods coming to life, the taste of the perfectly ripe apples we had brought for lunch, the feel of... the feel of a hand on my shoulder. Lacey was on the other side of me. I could see both of her hands on her canteen. This wasn't Lacey. "Lacey?" I whispered. "What's up, Mila?" she asked, still looking over the vista. "There's..." That's all I was able to get out, before another hand was slapped over my mouth, and I had begun being dragged back towards the steep ledge behind us. Lacey laughed and began to turn. "Mila, stop, you're..." Her smile faded to a look of fear. She covered her mouth with both hands, her canteen falling and spilling on the rock we were just perched on. "Let her go! Oh my God, Mila!" she yelled, and my captor, whoever they were, twisted around, and my left leg now dangled over the edge of the cliff. I screamed, too terrified to fight them off. If I moved too much, if I breathed a little too deep, would I go over the edge? "Quiet, both of you," I heard him yell. Wait, I know that voice. "Ben?" I struggled to say through his tight grip on my face. Ben was a boy we had gone to school with for a couple of years. He was 19, a senior graduating the following spring. He had left me a few notes in my locker since school started back. Disturbing notes. Saying what he'd like to do to me. It wasn't romantic things either. It wasn't nice things at all that he had written to me. Lacey caught wind of this and had told him to back off, told him I wasn't interested, and called him a creep. He had since left me alone, until now. "Oh my God," Lacey muttered. "Lacey, run! Call your dad!" I yelled out, rather unintelligibly through Ben's hand. Luckily, she understood me, taking off back down the mountain. "I've got you alone. Finally," Ben growled. "I saw Lacey's mom post on Facebook. You were coming out here to celebrate your birthday. I knew you'd come here. I needed to talk to you." He breathed into my ear. I swallowed tears. "I stayed here all night last night, not far from your campsite. I heard a vehicle, and I prayed to God it would be you. I could finally show you. I watched you all unpack your things. I watched you change into your hiking gear. Oh God, how I wished it were just you and me here. Maybe for our honeymoon we can come back." He seemed to be panting like he had run miles, but I know it was something worse. This guy was demented beyond what I thought. I could hear a helicopter approaching in the distance. I hoped with everything in me it was search and rescue or some sort of authority. But he kept going, ignoring the sound. And as you walked up the mountain, I followed, stayed just far enough behind. When you took your lunch break, I thought for sure you'd caught me when I tripped over that root and hit my arm on the tree. But no, Lacey covered for the noise without even meaning to. Suddenly, he let go of me and gasped. Above us, the helicopter had appeared and a ladder lowered down. In a panic, he jumped from the edge of the cliff into the canopy below. I heard branches break. Then again, it could have been bones. An officer, a ranger or search and rescue or something, I'm not really sure, descended from the ladder and picked me up. The authorities think that Ben died there, but they didn't find a body. Even still, there has been no recovery of a body. I made it out alive, but only barely. Someone that psychotic, I'm sure he wanted me dead, so that no one else could have me. The moral of this story would be to trust your instincts and never hike without protection. Otherwise, you're asking to be taken by surprise. Being followed. From Anonymous. After serving in the US Army for 11 years, I went on a 2-month European backpacking trip. I had no valid plan but to go through as many countries as I could, especially the countries that I've been wanting to visit for a while. I am planning another trip through Europe for some time in the summer of next year, actually. Anyway, on my previous trip, when in Rome, Italy, I realized that I felt like someone was following me. A little backstory. I had been walking around Rome, checking out the sights, and as I was walking around, I noticed that this man was walking behind me. I proceeded to step to the side to let him by. He continued walking, and I continued walking in the direction that I was heading in. But as I went on, I noticed the guy again. I tried not to think about it. I just proceeded to continue walking. But I did notice that the guy was walking in the same direction as me again. I began to feel a little anxious about the whole thing. Then I began to head in a completely different direction, finding a more crowded area. I thank my mother for always teaching me to never walk into isolated areas, especially if you think you're being followed. After realizing that with each turn, the guy was right there still, walking a little faster, I gradually walked a bit faster myself, and I was relieved when I finally found an area of crowded people with some type of art festival going on. I would have stopped to look at the artwork, but the guy was nearly to me. I was hoping that he didn't notice me, and I proceeded to slip away in a restaurant. With my luck, I couldn't find one, and when I turned around, the guy was there behind me. But he stopped when a group of police officers walked by. I got close to them and even pointed out the man to them. I'm so thankful to those police officers for being there. And even scarier, human trafficking was spiking in the area at the time. And people who were obviously tourists, maybe even myself, were easy targets. That may have been a pretty close call. Well, I hope you've learned your lesson, you silly, healthy backpackers. That's right. You'd better be packing some firepower in that pack. And perhaps a few of your friendly SWAT team members too. Anything to shoo away those mountain lions, creepy stalker, and ghostly visages that want your Slim Jim. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It helps a lot. If you have your own story, definitely share it with us at darkstories.org. Check the links in the description to support the show. there's a link to my Patreon where you can donate, and a link to my merch store to get some pretty creepy cool shirts. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, about 3 disturbing true stories from Tennessee. Death to Stormcloak says, "Good thing we're not in Alabama." Huh, the movie's about Tennessee, but okay. Austin Morris says, "Viewer from Smyrna, Tennessee." Awesome. I hope you survived the terrors of the Tennessee woods long enough to hear these stories. Joe Liccioni says, "Darkness, what's good?" Let's see here. My wife, the combat in Borderlands 3, and pepperoni pizza. Jen Child says, "I'm not finna go to Tennessee." Well, don't worry, girl, 'cause Tennessee will come right to you. It does that sometimes. Random Weird Kid says, "Tennessee is cool, but Alabama is full of disturbing acts." Well, I know I'm gonna have to hit more states again soon. So Alabama, Ohio, those are on my list. And I definitely gotta do a video on Florida Man. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.